Okay, so tomorrow's quiz has 10 questions. Out of these 10 questions, 9 of them you are going to be leaving your answers exact. So I'll be looking for your answer in simplest radical form. Now, some of them would be perfect squares. And then when you square root it, simplest radical form would be an integer. Then you will have one word problem. And in the instructions, it will tell you, round your answer to the tens place. That's the only question that you should be using your calculator for to get to the tens place. The other ones, you're going to have to break it down and leave them in simplest radical form. If, for example, you get a question and it's the square root of 75, and if you tell me that the square root of 75 is 8.7 because you use your calculator, and if the instructions said exact, you would get that question wrong. What you would have to do is break it down and tell me that this answer is equal to 5 square root 3. So you're leaving 9 of the questions in simplest radical form. So what you need to know from 9.1, remember in 9.1 we learned the Pythagorean theorem. That's what you needed to use to answer questions 1, 2, and 3. So you need to memorize a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Then the next 3 set of questions here, this is where you have to classify the triangle and tell me if it's acute, right, or obtuse. You're still using a variation of this. We're using the Pythagorean inequality theorem, and this is where if c squared is greater than a squared plus b squared, then your triangle is obtuse. If c squared is less than a squared plus b squared, then it's acute. Remember, if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then it's a right triangle. So this is what you needed to use for numbers 4, 5, and 6. Then for numbers 7, 8, and 9, this is where we learned about the special right triangles. You need to memorize the relationship of the sides. So the first triangle we learned was the 45, 45, 90 special right triangle. So when you have 2 congruent sides, you also have 2 congruent angles, and each of these angles are 45. You were told to memorize that the 2 legs were a, and the hypotenuse was a square root 2. The second type of special right triangle was the 30, 60, 90 right triangle. And you're going to memorize again the relationship of the sides. So if the 30-degree angle is down here at the bottom, then the side across from that would be A. The side across from the 60-degree angle is a square root 3. And then the side across from the across from the 90 degrees, which is the hypotenuse, would be 2 times A. So you need to memorize the rules here. And again, on the questions where I'm going to give you one of the sides, you're going to have to come up with the other sides and leave it in simplest radical form. Then the next set of questions here, numbers 10, 11, and 12, finding a geometric mean. All you're doing is finding the product of the 2 numbers and then square root that product. You're going to be leaving it in simplest radical form. Then for numbers 13, 14, and 15, this is also 9-3, and this is where we learn the 2 proportions. The 2 proportions you would use are the geometric mean altitude theorem, which was segment 1 over altitude over segment 2, and then the geometric mean leg theorem, that one was hypotenuse over leg over the segment of the hypotenuse adjacent to the leg, which I called SOHAL. And then you will also have a word problem. It may be similar to 16 and 17. It will not be like 17. I would definitely go back through your notes and your homeworks to look for similar word problems that you may see on the quiz. So again, 10 questions. It's equally spaced between the 3 sections. You're going to have a minimum of 3 from each lesson, and then one lesson gets that 4th question. So one lesson will have 4, and the other 2 will have 3 questions from it. So again, only one word problem. The rest are all going to be using the proportions, using Pythagorean theorem, or the special right triangle. So 10 questions. The review is a nice place to start, but again, also go back to notes, homeworks, warm-ups. One other thing you need to know for the quiz tomorrow is the formula for area of a triangle. And we did that, I believe, in the 9-1 homework. So this is where you're going to do either area is equal to 1/2 base times height, or memorize it as base times height divided by 2. So you should also know that formula for the quiz tomorrow. So in addition to all of these proportions and formulas, also know the area of a triangle formula. Yes. So she just asked, explain what the SOHAL is again. So just like the acronym is, so the acronym is SHOAL. So the letters in this acronym, the S stands for the word segment. So remember, we're splitting the original triangle. So I'll outline the original triangle. It's got the right angle here. The segments are the 2 pieces that this hypotenuse of the original triangle is split into. So the hypotenuse, which is Z here in this particular problem, got split when I draw in the altitude here. It splits my hypotenuse into 2 pieces or 2 segments. Doesn't matter which one is segment 1, which one is segment 2. So I'll go ahead and say the 12 is going to be my segment 1. Let me go ahead and just put in X here. And the X here, this is going to represent my segment 2. So I'm splitting the hypotenuse of the original right triangle into 2 pieces called 2 segments. Segment 1, segment 2. So in my SOHAL, I'm taking this segment, the piece of the hypotenuse, so the segment of the hypotenuse. So the piece of the hypotenuse, and then the A is the word adjacent, and adjacent means next to. So the segment of the hypotenuse, the piece of the hypotenuse that is adjacent to the leg that we're looking for. That's what the L is. So in this particular problem, the segment, the piece of the hypotenuse that is right next to this leg, because this is a leg of the original right triangle, and then over here, this one is also a leg. So the SOHAL for the 18, this leg, is going to be the 12, segment 1. The SOHAL for this leg would be segment 2, and it would be the X. So each leg has a different SOHAL because it's next to a different piece. Everybody good on the SOHAL? So it's the segment of the hypotenuse that's adjacent to the leg. So for number 15, the formula we would be using is going to be hypotenuse over leg, leg over the SOHAL. So the numbers I would have put in here, my hypotenuse was Z. The leg that I have information about is the purple one here, which is the 18. And then remember, its SOHAL was the 12. And then this one, you're not having to square root the answer because all we're going to do is cross multiply here. 12 times Z, 18 times 18 gives me 324. And then when I divide 324 by 12, I get 27. So the length of my hypotenuse here is 27.